What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another video today, and in this video we have a massive Sioux Falls Regional Airport update for you guys. This is the 66th airport update for the month of July 2025. We've got a lot to cover in this update with a new frequency coming, we got military charters, we've got an update on the terminal expansion project, we've got a lot to go over in this month's update. We're not going to stall any further and get started right away. Gate number 1 houses our Allegiant A320 for today. This came in from Orlando Sanford as flight 1197 on an early morning flight. This arrived in at 8:39 a.m. and have a scheduled 9:08 a.m. arrival. All the flights in this update are from Tuesday, July 22nd, with one exception, and we will get to that as we progress. And we'll take a look at all the routes and stuff once we get done with covering aircraft that are at the terminal right now, which, as I mentioned at the top of the video, there is an update on the expansion, mainly focusing on a loan that got approved from the city, so that will be nice to have at least some funding for this expansion, which is going to be scaled back a bit. Moving over to Gate 5, we have the American A319. This is now on a one daily frequency for the main line to the other frequency on the Embraer 175s. This A319 with the Sharklets arrived in from DFW as flight 2937, and this arrived in at 9:47 p.m. ahead of a scheduled 10:01 p.m. arrival. And then moving over to our United section, we actually have 3 United planes in this update, with 2 mainline and then a regional, which is not a scheduled flight at this time. We have the A320 on the Denver service today. This arrived in as flight 645 at 9:07 p.m., delayed from an 8:20 p.m. scheduled arrival, so a 47-minute delay for these passengers. Not as bad as like the 2.5 hour delay or whatever the heck it was when I flew Frontier to Denver. The delay was because we had a late aircraft coming in. It was already delayed on an earlier flight from San Diego to Denver before it continued onward to Sioux Falls. So with that delay, it just kind of stacked up, and they were able to make up some time, but not enough to really get us back on track. So my late arrival into Denver was the result, but thankfully not a major inconvenience since we didn't have anything else to do that night. But one inconvenience that did happen, unfortunately, was this United Express Embraer 175. This was supposed to do a turn to Denver last night on Tuesday night, but that got canceled. So instead, this aircraft actually came in from Eugene, Oregon as a repo flight, operating as flight 6946, a SkyWest service. This is actually scheduled to arrive in the early morning hours of Wednesday the 22nd. So this arrived in actually at 12:01 a.m., had a scheduled 12:20 a.m. arrival. So just about made it on the day of Tuesday instead of Wednesday, but still ahead of schedule there for the repo flight. And then we've got the much larger 739 on the Chicago mainline service right now. They have still kind of swapped between the 700, 800, and 900, just depending on the day. And some days when we get the 900, it is nice to see, since these larger aircraft can carry more people, and I always like having more passengers coming in, but this terminal gets pretty crowded when that happens. So this 739 arrived in as flight 2113 at 9:29 p.m. and have a scheduled 10 p.m. arrival, arriving in over half an hour early. So got a nice tailwind, or perhaps it was able to get out still early enough, or maybe even a little bit delayed, to where they did make up some time in the air, since the airlines love to block off so much time to factor in those delays, so they've gotten really good with that as of late. That's what I've noticed. Or maybe it's just been like that all along and I've never paid attention to that, admittingly. And then our last aircraft at the terminal before we do our route roundup, and then I'll provide news on the expansion project that I've been talking about for a while. We have the Delta A319 on the Atlanta turn. This arrived in as flight 2615 at 10:45 p.m. and have a scheduled 11:03 p.m. arrival. And that is all the aircraft that we have here. So let's do the route roundup first before we get into the major developments with the terminal expansion project. Starting with our Minneapolis service, looking at about 4 to 5 daily, with the one main line being the A319. So no major changes there, but predominantly a CR9 service as we head into August. And then just going in a clockwise loop, we'll go to Chicago, our American service, with 2 to 3 daily SkyWest 700s, and then as for United, That will be 4 daily, 2 or 3 to 4 daily, with the one main line being that 737. Right now, they're switching between different aircraft, which is not too surprising. Allegiant to Nashville, that is twice weekly, Monday, Friday. Atlanta, no changes there with the one daily main line. That will stay pretty consistent. Our Orlando Sanford service is coming to an end on August 17th. That'll be a Sunday, but it is Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday up to that point. And then Fort Lauderdale coming back in December. That'll start on the 19th, and it will start with the MAX 8, and that's what they're going to predominantly use, so that'll be good to see. Punta Gorda returns on November 20th. And then our Tampa St. Pete service, as of right now, that will conclude on the 16th, last day operated by a 737 MAX. And in our DFW, they actually have 2 mainline scheduled, so I must have missed that initially, but on Saturdays anyway, they do move to just the 1 mainline, the other 2 being 700s, the CRJ service. But otherwise, predominantly 2 daily mainline and then the extra Envoy or SkyWest 175, depending on the day. Heading over to Phoenix, there is a A320 mainly on that service with a 5 to 6 weekly frequency. Actually down to 4 weekly later in August. Denver with Frontier, that will be 5 weekly with only Tuesday and Saturday being emitted. And then for United on that same service, that will predominantly be the CRJs, 175s, A320s, multiple frequencies available there. And then for some new news, as with a new frequency that we're actually going to be getting pretty soon. This fall, American is going to add a second frequency on the Phoenix Sky Harbor service. It'll be a SkyWest CRJ 700, and that will be on the overnight frequency. So they're actually going to keep the aircraft overnight here, which I'm going to be curious on the logistics of that, because this terminal already gets full overnight with all the mainline aircraft that park here. So I haven't really kept track with if they have to move aircraft over to the stand right over here, and you see one of the special aircraft there we'll take a look at in just a minute. But if they do, does that get full as well? And it's kind of why they need this darn expansion project to get started soon. So hopefully we'll get some good news on that later, but there is some developments on that. And then continuing with the rest of the routes, we do have the 2 weekly Vegas service. Monday, Friday moves to in August. They dropped the Wednesday frequency after July. LAX coming to an end August 11th. Kind of wish that went a little bit longer into September for the big Spot LAX event that happens every year. Love to attend that, but unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to make that based on the logistics and everything. But one year I will go, I promise. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen. So as for some news on the terminal expansion project, which I've talked about frequently in these airport updates, as I mentioned a few months ago, they weren't able to get federal funding that didn't get approved, so they've been just trying to figure out a new solution as to get some funding. But fortunately, so there are some developments with that now, as the city of Sioux Falls will actually be giving a $5 million loan to the Sioux Falls Airport Authority for this concourse expansion. And it was a unanimous vote, which is good, so I'm glad to see the unanimous support for expanding this airport. So they are actually going to add about 4 gates, so the total capacity will be up to 11, and possibly a 5th new gate, so with 12 total gates, if they're able to get additional funding on that, which is good to hear. And they're saying that construction, it should start sometime next year. We'll see what happens, but I do know that they did change the center line on Gate 3. This was pointed out to me when I actually flew out of Sioux Falls on my airliner's expedition trip. They actually consolidated everything, so no more 3A and 3B, it's just now Gate 3, so I'll have to maybe update the diorama at some point to accurately reflect that, but just something to note there in terms of the changes. But overall, good to hear the news on the terminal expansion, and hopefully we will be able to get some additional funding as well from the state to further support that. But as of right now, we're kind of stagnant on gauge space and can't really get any new flights. I know there's been talks about trying to get Washington, D.C. Added to the route network, and maybe something like New York, or even get Charlotte back. That would be awesome to get Charlotte back, because that did pretty well in terms of the loads. It's just you don't have anywhere to park the plane. It's like you can't do anything about it. You could add something in the day because the terminal is pretty empty during that time, but otherwise, you're just kind of stuck, and the terminal gets pretty full. Like when I flew in and out of there, it was pretty packed. So hopefully this expansion happens sooner than later, but I will certainly be keeping a very close eye on any subsequent developments that do take place as we move forward. Currently editing the video, and I just remembered that on Wednesday, the day that I filmed this video, like not even more than 5 minutes after I finished filming, I got alerts of 2 diversions. This Delta 739 originated from Phoenix, and then this A320 originated from Detroit. So just only adding to the chaos that has happened here at FSD within the last month. So yeah, we'll get back to the actual video. But in the meantime, we'll check out some other aircraft roaming the airport. 3 more passenger aircraft, and then we got a couple military charters to assess. And also highlight the WestJet diversion that we had earlier this week. I'll talk about that at the end of the video as well. So, like I said, this is a very big update for FSD this month. Taxiing for departure, we have the United CRJ 700. This is actually a SkyWest CR7 instead of the GoJet 550s that fly to Chicago typically. This is departing as flight 4656, and this did leave pretty late, about 2 hours and 21 minutes, I believe. Yeah, 2 hours, 21 minutes of a delay for this aircraft departing at 1:46 p.m. Tends to be the norm when you're flying to Chicago, is that you always encounter some delays, whether it's because of like weather or, you know, gate space, because that's what we had. That's what I experienced on one of the Contour flights that I took recently. And then 2 aircraft arriving, which of course are going to have to, at least in this diorama scenario, they're going to have to wait on the hard stand, but we do have some other aircraft occupying that space right now. Here's the CRJ 200 with the Evo Blue livery. This arrived in from Denver as Flight 5975, a SkyWest service. This arrived in at 10:39 a.m., had a scheduled 10:42 a.m. arrival. No idea when these SkyWest 200s are going to leave the fleet, but since they still got several in the house livery sticking around, they likely have quite a few years left. And 3D Design Deck, having just recently released a SkyWest House Livery CRJ 200, I am going to pick that up at some point. It's just a matter of when, because my wallet needs some time off on getting new models. And I also need to get some space, because I have nowhere to put my wide-body planes and the other larger planes that I got from airliners. They're actually just sitting on the Des Moines diorama just across the way, and it's a bit of a mess, so I'm just trying to sort through all that, and hopefully I've got some time to get a new cabinet at some point. I don't know when, but either that or we're going to have to consolidate some models, put them in storage, or do something like that. But whatever the case may be, I'm going to figure that out as we go. Our last aircraft taxiing, we have a Delta CRJ 900. This arrived in from Minneapolis as Flight 4966, an Endeavor Air service. And this arrived in at 2:21 p.m., had a scheduled 2:36 p.m. arrival. And now for the fun part, which is going to be the military services, which is not something that I was expecting to get to see on the schedule, but it just happened to work out that way. And yeah, so here's the first aircraft that arrived in as part of this movement that we had once more, but just these 2 planes, no C5s or C17s, anything that I was aware of. So this Eastern 76, this actually arrived in first, and this was on July 13th, so just about a couple weeks ago now. I remember waking up that morning and I saw on my jet tip there was an alert for an Eastern 76 that arrived in at about 8 o'clock that morning from Boise, Idaho. And it stayed there for pretty much the entire day until it went onward to Jacksonville, the VQQ airport. So that's obviously not the main Jacksonville International Airport. That is the Cecil Airport, which is way out there. I think it's like it's like a military airport of some kind, something out there. I don't know too much about that, but that's where the 76 went, and that was registered November 700 Kilo Whiskey, whereas the model that Gemini made, this one was 705, I think. Yeah, 705 is the one that they made. And then the biggest surprise out of them all was this. The Eastern 777 that decided to show up. And it was a bit later in the day, I was on my computer putting together videos, and I get another jet tip alert that we were getting an Eastern 777 that was apparently diverting here. So it originated out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and it was going to go to Kansas City. But it ended up ultimately coming here to Sioux Falls instead, which I was a bit surprised by. I thought it was an error with flight radar and then jet tip picking up on that, kind of like what happened with the Delta A330neo diversion a couple years ago, where I thought we were going to get it, but it ended up going to Minneapolis anyway. So whatever the case was, it ended up coming here instead. And what's nice about this is that this is the exact registration that Gemini made, the one that flew to Sioux Falls, November 771 Kilo Whiskey. So I'll put the clip up on your screen, and you can check out the full video on my channel. Click that card if you want to see that. And yeah, it feels really nice to spot an aircraft in real life that I have as a model. And what also adds to this is just the sentimental value, since this was one of the two models that I got as part of the Florida excursion that we did last year. And I mainly picked this up just because we saw a couple of these at the Jet Midwest tour in Kansas City, mainly like the air cargo variant, which I don't think those are flying still, last I checked. But we saw plenty of these Eastern jets at MCI during that tour, so I thought to pick one up, which I didn't see any at the Kansas City airliner show. There's just the flaps down, so I wanted the regular wing configuration, and thankfully the airplane shop in Miami had one of those. So I picked that up there, and just that nice sentimental value from the Florida excursion, and now it has more sentimental value with the fact that this is the exact aircraft that flew here. So happy to have this, and happy to have both Eastern aircraft, which is the first time that I've had both in an airport update, which is great. And then to address the one last thing, the WestJet diversion that we got earlier this week. So on Monday, WestJet 1590, which was flying from Calgary to Atlanta, ended up diverting to Sioux Falls. And according to local news reports, a passenger suffered a stroke mid-flight, which is very scary to think about. So pilots got the aircraft into Sioux Falls rather quickly. And I remember this too because I got the jet tip alert that we were going to get a WestJet diversion. So I'm like, oh shoot, we're getting something interesting. So I immediately book it to the airport, and I get to the spot. I park my car, get out of my car, just as the aircraft is about to turn on to final, and then I get to the spot. I stop walking just as the aircraft is like right in my visual. So really good timing on my part with that. But as for the passenger, so they got him off the plane, took him to a hospital here in Sioux Falls, and he's in good spirits. He's in good health, which is excellent to hear. And you know, the healthcare system here in South Dakota, especially, and kind of across parts of the Upper Midwest, they are really good. The healthcare providers that we have here are top notch. I think they are like the best or one of the best in the U.S. Since I think part of it is just from the fact we have a large population that's in the older demographics, so like 65 plus. We've got a lot of those people around here, so you need a good healthcare system to make sure that they can, you know, they have a healthy life. And so really makes me feel happy to know that the passenger is okay and that everyone else was okay. But what ended up happening after that was WestJet was going to send in a MAX 8 from Calgary, presumably to pick up the passengers and carry them onward to Atlanta. But they ended up canceling that, and WestJet ended up just giving passengers compensation for the overnight that they would end up having to do. So the passengers left at around 9 o'clock Tuesday morning to continue onward to Atlanta. So I don't know how many passengers were on that FST to Atlanta segment with the WestJet flight, or if some of them ended up rebooking on other airlines to get to where they needed to be, because I can't imagine how many of those passengers were connecting. There's probably quite a few, but I'm also under the assumption that a majority of them, if not all of them, were of Canadian origin. Most of them being Canadian. So either way, just a very chaotic situation, but glad to hear that everything worked out in the end, even if it did take some time, mainly with regards to the passengers getting to where they needed to be. But in terms of the passenger who had the stroke, I'm glad to hear that he's okay. And it's just scary to hear about stuff like that, but glad to know that everything worked out for him and also his family who was with them. And they noticed right away that something was wrong, so that's how they were able to get on the ground quickly and get him to a hospital so that he could get the life-saving treatment that he needed. Oh boy, that was a lot. I don't know how many minutes I'm running on at this point. I'm past 20 minutes, at least in the raw recording anyway. But that's the FSD update for this month. Absolutely loaded with a lot of events, a lot of military charters, interesting visitors, some frequency changes, a new Phoenix frequency, which is going to be awesome. And then to top it off at the end there with a WestJet diversion most recently. So this was a very loaded update, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this FSD update for July, the 66th one, and just continuing onward. We'll be 2/3 of the way to 100 next month, so stay tuned for that, and we'll keep an eye on terminal expansion news as we move forward. With that being said, thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.